So in June of 2022, we had the culmination of decades of work on the pro-life right, but also for the so-called conservative legal movement, which may not be dead, kind of like the Constitution. We're not sure. We'll table that for now. But undeniably, the Dobbs decision represented decades of time and resources dedicated to one central cause, one precedent, which was overturning Roe versus Wade. Many of our friends, of course, will maintain that Justice Alito and the Dobbs majority didn't go far enough insofar as it failed to provide the 14th Amendment protection for life in utero. And perhaps they're right, but again, we're going to table that for now, these intramural discussions. The near singular focus in the conservative legal movement on Roe was justified, of course. Abortion on demand has been and remains a key ritual of sacramental liberalism, celebrated by many with religious fervor and equal defiance of our Creator God. So in this sense, Dobbs landed a blow to the idols of Moloch, but Dobbs, I maintain, stands for more than that, or it can stand for more than that. Since Dobbs, states have once again emerged as the predominant venues for the most pressing political and moral decisions. We could just call it governance, especially those dealing with health, safety, welfare, and the morality of the people. In other words, Dobbs may stand for a revival of federalism after at least 75 years of persistent consolidation of power by the central or general government. In this sense, Dobbs represents a moment of potential constitutional restoration, a rebalancing of the scales of sovereignty, so to speak, which is the perpetual balancing act that's inherent in our polity of parallel mixed regimes. Assuming this rather optimistic, this is uncharacteristic for me, but this is optimistic, assessment is correct, and I recognize not all has gone well or as planned in every state house in the country, but at least it's the proper venue. What should lawyers, judges, and jurists decide upon for their next target to encourage further healing of nature, we might say? How do we get things working again? I'll come back to this question momentarily. The federal Constitution, which is not sacred writ, contrary to some popular belief, but as Max Edling rightly describes, I think, a sort of international treaty to hold together what Alexander Hamilton called the most interesting empire in the world. The Constitution presupposed and preserved the pre-existing police powers over domestic policy of the colonies then turned states. The Anti-Federalists were right. No central legislature can adequately or competently legislate for the entire empire on domestic or internal affairs, even with the help of the fourth branch of government. Generally speaking, only a general or external policy sits within the proper purview and competency of that government. You know, like protecting the border from invasion. But indeed, obsession over uniform domestic conformity on a host of other issues noticeably distracts from efficiency or even a good faith effort on the external things more directly within the federal government's constitutional mandate. Moreover, the states predate the Union. Table for now to America's first coup, which is unilateral revocation of the Articles of Confederation, which was a perpetual union, very short-lived perpetuity. The states possessed their power of policy at the start. And on one theory, of course, this was by royal and not parliamentary grant. As I said, the past 75 to 100 years, depends on which republic you think we're on. You can number them as you wish, but we've had several. The past 75 to 100 years, though, have been marked by a concerted effort to consolidate the constituent parts of the empire into a uniform blob by federal fiat. And I had thought diversity was our strength, but everything points in the opposite direction. So to the point, my answer to the question posed earlier is very simple: to reinvigorate our compound, not consolidated polity, our federalism, our Constitution. The next 50-year project that the conservative legal movement, assuming it's alive, should be to overturn Everson versus Board of Education, the 1947 case, which by incorporating the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the states thereby imposed improperly and ahistorically Jefferson's wall of separation. It has served as the legal justification for morally hollowing out American life, sanitizing it of its historic religion, and evangelizing our progeny in paganism. Everson has done as much to degrade America as anything else. Like Roe, it stands unjustly and serves as an indictment of America so long as it lives. As we will on the so-called woke right, as I hear we're called now, As we like to say, and as Pastor Wilson said this morning, it's a question of which, not whether, when it comes to establishment. Now, there's no real hashtag return to anything that came before. There are only possible futures that can feature more or less continuity with the past. And so it's instructive to recall how we got here and where we came from if we'd like to do anything about it. I would naturally here insert a very long excursus about 17th century America. You would all no doubt love it. You would eat it up, and you would come away convinced that the Puritans were awesome. In the meantime, you can go read Dale's Code from Virginia or Massachusetts' first body of laws. So I will, against my better judgment, skip right to the founding era, our second founding, I should say. And in the late 18th century, Jefferson's Wall was nowhere to be found. That phrase that plagues us now originates, in case you didn't know, in what can only be described as a tweet to some Baptists in Connecticut. And I'm pretty sure that's how Gordon Wood characterizes it, but I can't remember. The errant remark didn't show up in Supreme Court dicta until 1876, when the court actually did decide that the government has an interest in what you do in the bedroom and that marriage actually is between one man and one woman. And rather humorously, Jefferson, as much as he wanted to dissipate denominational enthusiasms, never thought his impregnable wall applied to the states. His second inaugural address boasted that his first administration had respected the Constitution by not interfering. He was a bit of a textualist himself, you might say. Congress met Congress. And of course, Jefferson's and Madison's opinions on religion in Virginia were the minority report. The latter, meaning Madison, had suggested preemptive incorporation of the Bill of Rights at the time of ratification, and he would have been laughed out of the room if people weren't so annoyed by the proposal. Stephen Smith, Philip Munoz, a host of other scholars have all recounted that the First Amendment was uninteresting at the time and received minimal debate. The only goal was to assure the anti-federalists, so-called, that no uniform national denominational establishment would be imposed. So what were the states like then? Hopefully most of you know this, so I'll be brief. They had Christian religious tests for office, financial support of clergy, limited full civil participation of Protestants often, declared sectarian preferences, and so on. Even states like Tennessee, which precluded establishment of a denomination, still had a Christian test for office. Everything was either explicitly or implicitly Protestant coded, we might say. You can survey the state constitutions of, say, New Hampshire and New Jersey to find all of these things alive and well. They had robust blasphemy, Sabbath, and obscenity laws. Proselytizing was not a free-for-all. Morals were as regulated as health and safety. The whole person was considered, not just his material existence. Conscience was, of course, protected and tolerance encouraged, but this did not mean neutrality, and thought and action were still distinguishable. Up through the 19th century, Americans considered themselves a Christian people, as John Fies talked about, and rightly so. So did their laws, so did their constitutional order. The pan-Protestant ecumenism was obvious in memory and practice. States didn't just allow, but required Bible reading in schools and prayer. We had riots in Philadelphia, not over whether the Bible would be taught, but which translation to use. What a time to be alive. We've always been riotous, but at least they used to mean something when we would riot. I propose it looks like winning if we ever get back to that situation. As Jefferson himself recounted, on Sundays, and this is ironic, even federal buildings were open to church services, which included the Supreme Court. And even after incorporation, the First Amendment began in the 20th century, Sabbath laws were still being enforced. And even after the fall of the last robust denominational establishment, Jefferson's Wall was still nowhere to be found. But by 1940, however, Cantwell versus Connecticut had begun the process under review here, striking down the right of states to regulate religious solicitation. In Everson, the court took the liberty, as it often does, of employing erroneous and irrelevant dicta wholly unnecessary to the case and controversy in view. In Everson, the appellant lost. Public transport could be provided both to public and private religious schools, but thenceforth, preferential treatment for religion would be out of bounds. The court pretended that the regulation and encouragement of religion was not the responsibility and right of the states, and in its place bestowed a new right on individuals, the right to be free from state support of religion. That is, in a very real sense, free from state governance. In Justice Black's retelling of American history, religion was a danger to American freedom and the sovereign citizen, not the source of the community's history, life, and future flourishing. The impregnable wall was erected. It's just that New Jersey had not breached it, all in due time. The next year, McCollum versus Board of Education finished the job. No voluntary religious instruction in public schools. fast forward to 1961, Maryland's rather bland theistic oath of office was unconstitutional. 62, teacher-led prayer was unconstitutional, no matter how non-sectarian. The Shemp Court got rid of Bible reading in the Lord's Prayer, and Wallace versus Joffrey in 1985 suspected that even in a moment of silence you might be tempted to pray, so best to do away with that as well. So on and so forth. Now even kneeling on a football field is suspect. As Justice Thomas has noted, the Establishment Clause has been weaponized against both individual and communal free exercise, not to mention against state sovereignty and any classical definition of good human governance. The dogma that now lives loud in our jurisprudence is that everything but religion must be aided and protected, especially when it comes to education. Their religious instruction must be restrained, but pagan androgyny must be inculcated. Never mind parental preference. Everson is the jurisprudential source code on all of this, and more structurally, a barrier to constitutional harmony and function. Maybe it's part of why post-Dobbs we haven't been able to eradicate abortion in all of our states. It's just a thought. If states cannot regulate religion, how can they regulate morals? If police powers are not revived and exercised as they once were, then it doesn't really matter whether Roe exists or not. We'll remain a privatized, impotent, amoral, and pagan republic. That is to say, a dead one without a body without a soul. There is some evident willingness on the court at present, something we can discuss, to rethink Establishment Clause jurisprudence. Conservative lawyers must seize that moment, and Everson must fall. Conservatives need to break free from the liberal frame peddled by the court of Everson and its progeny. Government, our states, should not protect us from Christianity, but encourage and protect Christianity from its enemies, enemies of our little republics. There are worse things than Bible riots. I think we'd all agree at this point. Thank you.